Both on this old house and the new Yankee workshop for years, we have always promoted safety in all aspects of what we do, but most importantly, in eye protection.
For 21 seasons, Norm Abram walked into a modest workshop behind a Massachusetts farmhouse, put on his safety glasses, and built something beautiful in front of you. There was no drama, no elimination rounds, no celebrity guests dropping in to generate excitement, no manufactured conflict between contestants or judges delivering verdicts. Just a man, his tools, a carefully considered plan, and the kind of unhurried competence that television almost never allows itself to simply sit with. The show was still popular when it ended in 2009. It was profitable. It was fully funded by PBS and beloved by millions of loyal viewers who had built their Saturday mornings around it for more than 2 decades. So when the announcement came that no further episodes would be produced, the reaction from those millions of viewers was not the gradual acceptance that accompanies a long farewell season. It was shock. And the reason Norm Abram walked away from something that was still working, still beloved, and still entirely his to continue was not what most people assumed at the time, and not what the rumors that circulated afterward suggested. It was something quieter, more personal, and ultimately more honest than any of the dramatic explanations people invented to fill the silence. To understand why the show ended, you have to understand what it actually was and how genuinely rare that kind of television has always been. The new Yankee workshop launched in 1989, created by producer Russell Morrish, the same man responsible for this old house. Morrish had watched Norm Abram work for years as lead carpenter on that program, and noticed something in him that went beyond technical skill. There was patience. There was a particular quality of clarity in how he explained what he was doing and why. There was the ability to make a dovetailed joint feel approachable to someone who had never held a chisel, while simultaneously satisfying someone who had spent 40 years at a workbench. Morris built him his own stage, a 936-square-foot workshop stocked with every tool a serious woodworker could want, tucked behind a farmhouse in Massachusetts, and designed to feel like a real working space rather than a television set. The format was straightforward and, in its simplicity, quietly revolutionary. Norm would introduce a project, often beginning by visiting a historical landmark or museum piece connected to the style he was about to build, studying the original construction before returning to the shop to replicate himself. Step by step, no shortcuts, no assistant doing the difficult work off camera between segments, no second version of the piece built by a professional before filming began. Every cut the audience watched was his. Every joint was his. Every decision about grain direction, wood species, and joinery method was explained and executed in real time by the same person talking them through it. The show ran on PBS without network pressure to chase ratings through stunts or controversy, which meant it could do the one thing commercial television almost never permits. It could simply be very good at what it was without apologizing for not being something more exciting. By the early 1990s, it had become a Saturday morning institution in the specific and irreplaceable way that only a handful of television programs ever achieve. Viewers did not tune in exclusively to learn woodworking technique, though many of them did learn it. They tuned in to spend time with Norm. His quiet confidence, his consistent plaid shirt, his safety glasses, the way he reminded you at the beginning of every single episode to protect your eyes as though he genuinely cared whether the person watching in their living room was paying attention to safety. All of it accumulated into something that television produces very rarely and almost never deliberately. It produced genuine comfort. Over 21 seasons, approximately 235 complete projects were built on screen, ranging from simple shop jigs to elaborate period reproductions, outdoor structures, and furniture pieces that became defining references in their styles. Woodworking club memberships grew. Tool sales spiked on weekends following new episodes. Instructors around the country credited the program for bringing new students through their doors. Norm Abram had become, without fanfare or self-promotion of any kind, one of the most influential figures in American craft of his generation. What the audience experienced as a calm, meditative 22 minutes of television required somewhere between 40 and 60 hours of preparation and filming to produce. That meant sourcing and inspecting lumber in specific species and exact dimensions before a single cut could begin. It meant designing a build process that would function on television, making decisions about which steps could be shortened for camera and which needed to be shown completely. It meant setting up angles and lighting and tool placement so that everything looked seamless on screen. And at the center of all of it, Norm still had to build the piece. That is the detail that made the show fundamentally different from everything else in its genre. He was not performing carpentry for camera, while skilled craftspeople did the actual construction between takes. He was doing it genuinely, with real consequences if something went wrong, and with no mechanism for quietly correcting errors off-screen. The authenticity was not a production choice designed to appeal to viewers. It was simply the only version of the show that Norm was willing to make. That authenticity came at a cost that accumulated slowly across 21 years. The workshop floor was bare concrete. During active filming, Norm stood on it for 8 to 12 hours a day, not for a season or two, but for more than 2 decades, absorbing that impact through his joints, his back, and his feet year after year. Repetitive sawing, chiseling, and sanding performed thousands of times led persistent joint pain that grew progressively harder to manage. His back carried its own accumulated strain from years of bending over workbenches and lifting heavy lumber. Plantar fasciitis, caused by those long hours on unpadded concrete, had become a chronic condition that did not resolve between seasons. And while none of this ever appeared on screen because Norm simply did not let the effort break the surface of what he was presenting to viewers, behind-the-scenes quiet conversations had already begun. Discussions with producer Russell Morris and with WGBH about what continuing the show would actually require and what was costing the person at its center to keep providing it. At the same time, Norm had been carrying 2 demanding television jobs simultaneously for years. His commitment to this old house continued throughout the entire run of the new Yankee workshop, which meant separate production schedules, separate preparation requirements, and a sustained physical and mental investment of 2 programs rather than 1. The difference in what each role demanded was significant. On this old house, Norm was an important contributor within a larger ensemble. On the new Yankee workshop, he was the entire foundation. Every episode existed because of what he specifically brought to it, and no episode could be made without him doing every piece of the actual work from beginning to end. That level of total responsibility, sustained across 2 decades with no meaningful reduction in what was required to maintain the show's quality, is not something that a person can simply decide to carry indefinitely regardless of what their body is communicating. The decision to end the show, when it came, was Norm's decision entirely. That fact matters and requires emphasis because in the years following the announcement, various explanations circulated that had no basis in reality. Stories about creative disagreements behind the scenes, about network pressure, about declining viewership or sponsor conflicts. None of it was true. The people closest to production confirmed consistently and without contradiction that there were no external forces pushing Norm out. The show had not been canceled. It had been ended deliberately and thoughtfully by the person who built it through 21 years of real work. Norm addressed the decision with the same directness that characterized everything else he ever did. He said it had a great run, built challenging projects, met wonderful woodworkers, and received loyal support from millions of viewers. That was a complete statement. No grievances, no blame, no attempt to generate a more dramatic narrative around a decision that was entirely clear to him. Russell Morris, who had been with the show from its first day of production and whose property had housed a workshop for all 20 years of its run, framed it simply. The show could not continue without Norm. There was no version of a new Yankee workshop that made sense with anyone else at the workbench. It was not a format that could be handed to a successor, because it was not really a format at all. It was a specific person doing a specific thing in a specific way, and the decision to end it was inseparable from the decision Norm had made about his own life and his own body. Morris also mentioned something that rarely appeared in discussions of the ending. Norm had things of his own he had never had time to finish. His timber-frame colonial home in Carlisle, Massachusetts, which he had built himself, had details he had always planned to return to and never quite had space for, because the show consumed so much of his production energy every year. Walking away from a program was not retreating from woodworking. It was finally making room to do it on his own terms, for himself, without cameras or deadlines, with the sustained pressure of being the sole foundation of a major television production. On October 16th, 2009, WGBH Boston made the announcement officially. There was no farewell special, no final episode with everything wrapped in ceremony and emotion, no dramatic goodbye constructed for the audience. It ended the way Norm had always worked, quietly, without unnecessary ceremony, with everything already said that needed to be said. The fan response was unlike anything the woodworking community had seen in reaction to a television announcement. Message boards and woodworking forums filled within hours. Fine Woodworking magazine reported reader responses of the kind that accompanied genuine personal loss rather than the cancellation of a television program. People wrote about the show being woven into the rhythm of their lives, about watching it with parents who were now gone, about children who had grown up watching it and were now adults who still remember which projects had appeared during Saturday mornings they spent together. Veteran woodworkers credited the program with reigniting passions they had nearly let go. Beginners described the confidence that came from watching someone explain difficult things with patience and without condescension. Teachers wrote about entire classrooms that had come to craft through what they had seen on that modest PBS program. What the response revealed was something that ratings numbers had always suggested without fully capturing. The new Yankee workshop had not simply entertained people. It had shaped how they spent their time, what they valued, and how they thought about making things with their hands. In January 2023, more than 13 years after the final episode aired, Russell Morris made the entire series available to watch for free on YouTube. The response from a new generation of viewers was immediate and sustained. People in their 20s and 30s found the show as if for the first time and responded with the same quiet admiration every generation before them had. Comments described staying up until 2 a.m. watching consecutive episodes. People described ordering their first set of chisels after a single